An idea on taking the occasional leap, just to see what will happen, can lead to the most wonderful results. So is the case of Lulu and Dasha Plesen. Reaching out, a thought in the ether, and then a response, and then euphoria. Lulu strikes me as a creative adventurer, a seeker of a truth as yet unknown, willing to experiment, open to nuanced individualism, and very much in possession of her unique visions of artistic definition. Reading an article of hers is a journey. Listening to her speak striking passionate notes, revealed and then quickly averted. This is the first chat with Lulu about her work in Moscow, her appreciation for art, the voices of others, and her need to be free for her wishes to find expression. Thank you, Lulu, for your time. Two and a mic clocking out. Enjoy.
Dung weche pek kuduelo mabiro etu under mic. Dung parodit kod jok mawuoye etu under mic. Seche tin sud buta wawinji etu under mic. Ola wachokre wabed piny biwawinje ero chako Dungo mit ndi and a mic podcast makende.
I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Lulu this evening. Hi, Lulu. How are you?
Hi, great. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And we met just a couple of weeks ago at an organizational event in Leipzig, organized by an organization called, and that's lots of use of the word organization, wir.de, which is a Russian group, essentially. Do you know a bit more about it that you'd like to say, or?
No, I really actually found out about them because of this trip.
Oh, really? Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
No, that's quite funny, isn't it? So yeah, I will put a link to wir.de in the podcast notes so that if anybody's interested in finding out how a Russian sort of community group in Berlin managed to communicate with such random people as Lulu and myself, then that will be up there. But yeah, Lulu, would you like to just introduce yourself a bit?
Sure. So I'm a communication design student here in Berlin. I also do some work in art, mostly curating, writing about it, and really into some science stuff. I like to do research, but I'm really picky about it, so I only do research in the areas that I'm completely in love with.
Okay, all right, that's interesting and opens up different avenues for us to pursue at different points. You've spoke about your curation of art, but it's quite specific, isn't it? At least what you've shared with me is quite specific. Is the kind of art that you're interested in?
Yeah, mostly I can say that I'm mostly interested in contemporary art, which is a bit odd because the beginning, when I was like 17, 18, I always thought that I would be into Asian art and ancient history and kind of going into that direction. And I was thinking that it's so lame to be into contemporary art. Like, so, everyone does it, so it's not that special. But then I realized that it's more relevant, it speaks more to me, I can understand it more because I'm living in the period when it's created, so I interpreted it in a way that is more, not maybe true, but closer to what the artist had in mind, which is also kind of not always important. But anyway, I kind of stumbled into visual poetry, and from that into the art of performance. And then I realized that I just like weird and not ordinary stuff. So is for now, I would love to, in the future, curate artists and curate exhibitions, festivals, something completely mind-blowing, unusual. And I actually have something like that already kind of in progress, in the process of ideation. So I can tell a bit about that.
Yes, please. Yeah.
It's so I've always been fond of this great artist from Russia. Her name is Dasha Fedorova, but she's known as Dasha Plesny, and she does her art with mold. She grows mold, she adds some colors to it, and it's a lot of science, it's a lot of work, and years put into that research and trying new things, experimenting, but it looks absolutely stunning. And I love everything that is somehow connected with science or with nature in art. I think it's amazing. And she's just, as a person, she's just really cool. So I was always thinking about speaking to her and taking her interview and like writing about her more. But I felt so shy because she's becoming more popular and popular, and I thought she's too huge for me. Like, who am I to speak to her? But then I remember I had a rough day here in Berlin. I was like really down, and I thought, what do I have to lose? I'm just gonna text her. And she immediately answered, and she agreed to do an interview. We kind of also did it short notice, like this podcast now. But it was really fun. And then she realized that I'm in Berlin, and she was like, well, maybe I can come and do an exhibition there, and maybe you can curate it. So yeah, we kind of working towards that. But it's going to be a long process because it's hard to bring an artist from Russia to Berlin now.
Yeah, for understandable reasons. Okay, that would be great to have some. I mean, the interview that you gave, did this turn into like a podcast? Is it an audio file that some people can listen to? Is it on YouTube, or did you kind of type it up as an article?
For now, it's an article. I originally wrote it in Russian for my Russian blog, kind of. But then she also has a lot of English-speaking audience. So she asked if we can do a translation and also translate it to English. So both articles are out there on the internet. And yeah, you can check them out if you're interested. There's almost everything you need to know about her, basically.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. But your articles, I think, will be a good place to start for those people who are not familiar, and those who are, perhaps also who can speak Russian at least and can also read your original article. So if you want, we can share your links also in the podcast notes.
Why not?
Yeah, indeed. And also, just on a side note, so before we started recording, you also said that you had done some podcasts when you were in Russia. And yeah, can you just talk a bit about that? And can people still access your podcast?
Yeah, it's still there. It actually was supposed to be continued, but for some reason it's not. And I still haven't confronted the person who should have been the host now. But it's also in Russian, so for anyone who can listen to Russian podcasts, or who wants to listen to Russian podcasts, you can check it out. It was originally a podcast from librarians about librarians, because when I came more than a year ago, I came to work to the library, and my mind was blown because I thought that it would be a boring job. Not boring for me, but stereotypically just sitting. I thought that I would have a bunch of time to just read books and do my things, and just from time to time help people find some books. But then it turned out to be a lot of different things and projects, and just non-stop running around and creating stuff, which was really fun. And I met so many amazing people there, young scientists, artists, and every time I would talk to someone, I felt like, wow, this could really be like a podcast. And then I find out that they opened a studio same year as I came to work there. And as an employee, I could use it for free. So I decided, why not? And on behalf of the library, I created a podcast. And I started at first just inviting my colleagues. There are a lot of episodes with them. And then I started also inviting people from the outside, partners of the library, our speakers, my friends who are artists. My favorite episode was, I love them all, but the most, I think, rewarding for my soul was with my friend who's an artist in Moscow. We talked about art, I think just in general, and try to answer some big questions like what is art and if we should call art beautiful, and different perspectives of looking at it. And we just had so much fun. I think it's still a controversial kind of discussion that we had, but I still haven't heard from anyone any bad reviews or anyone trying to kind of, argue with me about any topics that we brought up there. So I'm still waiting, really open for any discussion. But it was really fun to do that. And I love to have a podcast, actually.
I know how you feel. Yeah, it's always great to be able to speak with different people and to give them an opportunity to express themselves. I find it inspirational to hear people expressing themselves, listening to their stories, as indeed I do here. And often I'm shown like a different world sometimes when, I mean, there are some topics obviously that I'm familiar with beforehand, but then like in the case of the Chinese performance art, which we're going to talk about in a moment, this, even though I'm familiar with some or one or two of the protagonists that we've mentioned or you've mentioned in the notes, I just am still blown away by the significance of the meaning and how also I could have gone about my life without really focusing so much on these questions, even though they are questions which touch my life and the existence of society around me. And so I think that's really the power of art, to kind of transcend time and language in many ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and as you said also before, which is great. I mean, I've never really hugely appreciated modern art, contemporary art, but the point that you make, which is with contemporary art, we live in the times of the artist, and so therefore we have an immediate relationship with the message that they're trying to communicate, which is not necessarily the case with Renaissance art.
Yeah.
And that's a very powerful point, I think, which you raise. So
Yeah. Sorry if I'm
No, please.
interrupting. I just I used to have this view on art that I used to think like a grandma, that it was so much better back then in the day where I wasn't even born, and I felt like I'm classics girl. But I think a lot of that is because since childhood, I blame my mother for some of that, because she used to play classic music all the time to me. So maybe I just grew up into snob of some kind. But then when I started reading books and researches about the perception of art, I realized that, okay, we'll look at this Renaissance painting, for example, but we will never see them the same as people from that time saw them, because they had different education. They had absolutely different background, life conditions, anything. And for example, that Renaissance art is really, really closely connected with mythology. I don't know actually how it's here, for example, in Germany, but in Russia, they don't really teach that anymore. So it's not a common knowledge to know the stories behind these paintings. So that's why we have, I think, kind of like a tourist view on them. We see it, we think, oh yeah, it makes me feel something. It maybe resonates with me, but without knowing history and maybe the story that was put behind it, I think it would be like looking, I don't know, the sky and seeing that it's blue, it has clouds, and just makes you feel so at peace, you know? Yeah, so living in the time where paintings are created, especially the time where so much is going on and so many feelings and emotions are processed by millions of people, you're kind of looking for a way to express yourself without going absolutely crazy. And then you find a piece of art that resonates with you and kind of speaks for you and lets you just be in it, which is absolutely beautiful. At the same time, my last point for this
I hope not. Please keep talking. Yeah.
is that art is also timeless in a lot of ways. So we can also resonate absolutely beautifully and deeply with anything created in any time. For example, for me, my favorite, one of the most favorite art pieces of all times are Rubens' paintings, especially Demon Sitting. I think it's translates like that to English. I don't know why, because it's kind of scary. It makes me feel like all my darkness and all my fears and all these negative emotions, they really find peace when I look at this painting. So I think we can just love whatever we want. It can be Renaissance art, it can be contemporary art. It doesn't really matter what you love or what you hate, as long as art gives you some kind of feeling, it's good. It lives to purpose.
Yeah. And I often feel that I just don't know enough when it comes to art. I like to read about artists, and I like to read about how closely artists were related to politicians and leaders of past times. As in nowadays, you don't really find that an artist has to be commissioned by a king, a queen, a prince, a princess, an earl, or a lady, or whatever. Whereas in the past, that's the only way they could survive. And so they were particularly politicized. They were heavily influenced by religious institutions. In many cases, I think I remember in the case one of my favorites, Caravaggio. He was always on the run because he got himself into so much trouble that he would stop somewhere. He had no money, so the way that he could pay for room and board was basically, hey, I'll give you a painting, and then let me stay here for a week, and then run away again. But the thing is, when we look at their paintings, we never really understand what happens in the background. And I think that's another point which you make, is you can look at an artist's work from the past, one of these classics, but we don't really know the story in the background. We don't always know all of the messaging that is coming through there unless we've studied a particular artist's biography. Whereas with modern art, all of these people exist. They are prevalent on social media. They have work which you can actually go to see in certain cases if you live near a museum of some sort. We can share space with these people. We could breathe the same air. And this is something we could never do with previous artists. That relationship didn't exist, that understanding. And I do believe you maybe forced me now to rethink a little bit about modern art. So thank you for that.
Didn't expect that.
No, I didn't at all, really. But I would. I'm open-minded enough to accept that I need to look again at some of my opinions. But this does bring us then to, as we mentioned, and the topics that you sent me for us to discuss. So Chinese performance art. And you sent this great link from the Tate Gallery in London. And yeah, do you want to talk a bit about the political nature, or perhaps just whatever, freely, what you want to talk about with regards to Chinese performance art and so on?
Chinese performance is extremely political. That's why a lot of people actually don't appreciate it enough, because they just judge it by its cover. Kind of, they see the photos, they see some videos, they think, oh, it's crazy what they did, and they're absolutely kind of. It's okay that I think that, because it is crazy, but knowing the political background of that performance and understanding what those people went through and saw and maybe lived through in a lot of ways, it's you kind of come to understand why they do it and why they put themselves in such pain in the sake of art, in the sake of being heard and seen, because it's really hard with nowadays politics in China to actually be heard by society, by people around you. So a lot of the artists, they just aim to the West to be at least heard there, and they have to be controversial, they have to be loud, and they kind of have to do things that people would talk about. But it's my opinion. I never talked to them, unfortunately, till this day. There's very little information actually about any piece of Chinese performance. You have to look thoroughly to find any, for example, description, like what was done, why it was done, what was the idea behind it. It's not for everyone. Some people, I mean, even a lot of people who I talked about it, I even gave 2 lectures about Chinese performance, and I had people in the audience screaming, oh, they're crazy, they're psychopaths, it's not art. And then there would be loud arguments between people in the audience.
Chinese people or
no, just
okay.
Russian people.
Okay.
It was in the library where I worked.
Okay. In Moscow or in Berlin?
Yes, in Moscow.
Okay.
There are a lot of Chinese enthusiasts there, but still we don't have that much information on China and its culture in general. It's not, I would say it's kept well behind the curtains. Educational institutes like to keep it for the, I think, for the students, for higher education. They don't really like to put out the information for the wider audience for some reason. But yeah, I had people interested in this topic, and I showed them what it really looks like, Chinese performance, especially the one from 90s and early 2000s. I think it's one of the wildest times. So there was a lot of happening. But I mean, even if art brings out some really negative, bad emotions, it's still art and it still does what it has to do. So we cannot just stop people from doing what they do for the sake of their art and what answers to their heart personally.
Yeah, I mean, I think I remember reading somewhere, perhaps even in some of the notes and links that you sent, that art itself is a form of protest. Definitely in the case of this Chinese performance art, that which pertains to the early 90s. So from what I read, this formed a specific collective formed after the events of Tiananmen Square. This was like the student protests in Tiananmen Square, and they were famously attacked by the Chinese army. There was a very famous photograph of a young student standing in front of a tank. And I think this is one of the most famous photos of the 90s, maybe even the century in some ways. But I mean, it's very interesting that in many ways, I mean, you talk there about how a lot of people in Russia were interested in what was happening in China, and there was a lot of, at least, cultural interest. From a Western perspective, there is a particular political view of the relationship between Russia and China, which is obviously shrouded in the propaganda of the West about the political relationships that exist. But what you're saying from there is that even though there may be this relationship at government level, there's not so much open information exchange between the peoples.
Yeah, it's not like that Chinese people don't want Russians to know about them. It's quite the opposite. I found during my studies, I used to study Chinese literature, that Chinese people are actually really open, and they're extremely interested in giving information about their culture and talking about it. There are some perks, weird situations around the Chinese language, like that from the native speaker perspective. It's really funny to see foreigners speak Chinese, but it's completely another story. In general, they're very, very friendly in a cultural way, but the academic environment of sinologists in Russia, I hope they won't be listening to this, but if they do, it's still okay that they hear it for the first time. Finally, they're not really as open and as friendly as the Chinese people, for example, with their culture and giving this knowledge to others. They want to keep it preserved and feel maybe like they're above, because they have these books and this information and this kind of research. So if it's out in the open, everyone can access it, and so everyone can know this, which maybe won't be so special, anymore. There's a lot of things I didn't like about academic atmosphere at the Chinese faculty, and this kind of closeness and arrogancy even really didn't resonate with me at all. I didn't enjoy that. And actually, I remembered that during my first year, I wanted to create kind of platform, a website, to share not only Chinese, but Middle Eastern culture, Japanese, South Asian culture, African culture, to give people more information about it, to get rid of stereotypes, because it's so bad, the education system, that when you tell people that you learn Chinese studies, they think that you learn in Japanese. They cannot even divide the two countries between each other. So it's absolutely not right, in my opinion, to keep it that way. And it's actually getting better because of the politics, because of the development in the relationship between Russia and China, and now this kind of education about China is more available, and young people especially, can access it pretty easily if they want to, and that's great, but the reason for it is not so great.
Yeah. Okay, so there's an element of protectionism, it seems, within Russian academia with regards to the culture of China and perhaps other countries.
Kind of, yeah, in a way. I don't know if that's their goal. I'm not saying that there are some evil people keeping secrets from others, but it didn't feel like they want to really share it, with the majority of people. And they would always talk about it in such ways wouldn't be understood by everyone. So it's also, you know, also not a great thing, because if you want to educate country, you have to make it simple so everyone understands it, so it's interesting and makes people curious about it. You don't have to make it complicated.
Yeah, of course. Which also reminds me in many ways of a topic that I've addressed many times on this podcast channel before, which is essentially the theme of propaganda. And I've always spoken about it with regards to Western propaganda, especially through the ages, about how during times of colonialism that they tried to justify their operations by talking about how they were providing certain benefits, or they were civilizing certain areas of the globe because that's what they were so good at, whereas in fact it was just a justification for them to murder, rape and steal. And it's very unfortunate in the sense that so many times it happens that they manage to achieve these tasks or these horrific targets by hiding the reality from the people. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's necessarily the goal of the academics, but when you say that people hide things because of their own personal interests, unfortunately, this appears to be a very human failing, which is not limited to any one culture or country, but instead every powerful country tries to use the control of information in any way it can.
Yeah, it's I don't know if it's necessary really to do that, but for me it doesn't make sense at all. I cannot find any rational reasons to not keep these sources out in the open, but that's how it is for now, at least. I think it connected a lot to this kind of education tradition, and that the faculty that I used to study at was said to be the best #1 faculty for Oriental studies. So I would say there are a lot of, these elite kind of academia air. I don't know. It really often felt like I was out of place and that I didn't belong there because I wasn't intelligent enough for these people. And you never want to feel this way. And, it really spreads to everything, to every aspect of education. And I think maybe that's why also the information that they have, they don't really share it with everyone openly. Maybe because they want to keep it elite and kind of special in this way.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think there are different layers to society, and people always try to distinguish themselves from some other group, whether that's on the basis of class, gender, nationality, or some other kind of distinguishing feature. But it never lends itself to anything positive. So I can completely understand why you would have felt the way that you felt. I mean, in fact, the first time that I heard you speaking politically, emotionally on a topic was when we both engaged in the topic of, or the workshop, which was about feminism. And that indeed is a very powerful topic. And I wouldn't want to mix that up with what we're talking about now, but I would love to have another podcast with you talking about feminism from the cultural perspective that you have experienced, and that would be an interesting conversation for us to have. But
I would love that, because I do have a lot of things to say about that.
Good. And you have very eager ears on this side of our conversation to hear everything that you have to say about it. But looking at just one more question with regards to the type of art that we're talking about here, this performance art. You are younger than me, obviously, and this kind of art which began in the 90s, extended in the 2000s, and then there's a reference that you sent me, which is about the Cruel Youth Diary, which is of China in the 2010s and after COVID, the economic and social struggle. These are very, very recent socio-economic and socio-political events, and I'm sure these are events which have also touched your life, because it's your generation that has lived and grown up through these events. Does this kind of art also speak to you because you feel that you are a part of the events that have occurred?
It's in a lot of ways it does, but I think I don't know about the majority of people. Actually, I never really discussed it with anyone, especially with my generation. But for me, it can be confusing in some ways, because when such things happen, like crisis and just catastrophic events, and it scares you so much, and you just feel overwhelmed, and then you see this artwork, for example, performance that answers to it perfectly, and at the same time you feel that it answers to you. You feel that you're not alone in this emotional place, if I put it nicely, but also you feel scared, because you understand that it's bad, it's really bad, so bad that not only you feel all these negative emotions, but so many people also do. It's like, before seeing it and resonating with this art, it was small and it was only inside of you, but then you realize how much bigger this problem is. And when you hear, and through art, you usually, especially with performance, you hear stories or you see stories, and they're very strong, and then you open different sides of these events to yourself, and I become really scared sometimes, and more overwhelmed than ever. But then I kind of find peace in it at the same time. So it's really, again, controversial. It's really a lot of things going on, kind of a mess. But I think it's best that we have we have these absolutely brave and bold people who openly express themselves, because it's not easy, especially coming from such cultural background, when you kind of even scared to go to the subway, and you just fear that you look abnormal and someone might approach you and talk to you. So yeah, I have a lot of respect for those people, honestly, and I love what they do, and I love to talk to them about that. I love to feel that I'm not alone in this mess. It's always been like that, but I do wish that there's gonna be, better events in the future, and art that would show maybe kindness, positive outlook.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned courage and you mentioned events, and these are two words which I could put together to talk about this as a final topic, if I may, about some of the events that you've perhaps been involved in, or the challenges that your team has faced while organizing, and also in creating your blog. It's not always been easy for you to do the work that you do, has it?
Yeah, when it comes to organizing events in a political sense, it was most difficult challenge in my work so far, because every day something new happens, crazier than the day before. new regulations, new lists of people and organizations you cannot mention, you cannot work with, you cannot like even Google. And it just we used to laugh a lot about that, but I think it was a hysterical laugh, because it's not fun to work in such conditions, and it's not even fun to be human in such conditions, to just live by and go with your life. So I'm not going to focus on that, but with cultural events, it came to, first of all, the problem of budgeting, because we I think it's obvious where all the money goes. So there was never enough budget to do anything, and it's really hard to put your ideas to life when you get limited in every step of the way. Then it's also came to those days when we were prohibited to work with people from other countries at all, even from friendly countries. So because every foreigner had to talk to the police about their activity, and then the HR of the library didn't want to do all those reports about hired foreigners. So just from being skeptical of Australians coming to the library, and wanted to do like a debate club. And I actually had this conversation with one of my colleagues, not from my department, but the Department of Safety, that he told me to look out for those Australian and British people, because they're definitely spies. And they came to the library to get information. And I was sitting absolutely in awe. Okay, even if they are, what kind of information do they want? We just have classic literature, some art literature, a lot of kids' books. And when we don't work, we just laugh at memes and listen to music. Like, what kind of information are we hiding here? But also, it was so sad to talk to these interesting, amazing people and tell them, I'm sorry, we cannot work with you because you're from another country and you're from an English-speaking country. And also, when it comes to English, once we were told by finance department, for some reason, I don't know why they're in charge of that we cannot use English words in social media, that we should translate everything to Russian. And I used to work in Anglophone center. So it's absolutely English-focused center. And imagine they tell you you cannot use any English words. Well, we didn't follow that rule, obviously. I still love the girls that I worked with. Such an amazing team. I really found so much comfort in them. And so many of the most amazing days that library are connected with them. But it was hard for all of us in so many ways. And then also, because it's a government library, we had to listen to these speeches about why it's all happening, and that poor Russia has always been just a punchbag for all these Western European countries. And I think I once laughed really out loud after listening to that. And I even thought that I might get fired, but I didn't. Anyway, it was heartbreaking, and I was never an activist in a ways that maybe I should have been, but I couldn't just keep silent, and keep working just to do it. I love my job, but at some point I just left, and I told them that the reason was because I'm moving, but I left months before actually moving because I needed some time to just get out of that.
A very toxic and threatening environment, restrictive even, it seems.
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, I love to tell the story. I think it says a lot about the atmosphere. For example, in Moscow, I fell in love with this show, RuPaul Drag Race. And back in Moscow, I was only watching it in my apartment, far from people's eyes. And then when I was on the plane to Berlin, I had some episodes downloaded. And I remember myself just opening the laptop and watching it just so freely. And I thought to myself, wow, I can not care what people see, and no one will come to me and threaten me just because I watch this show. So I'm actually going to a country where it's not against law, you know, which is absolutely crazy how this can be against law. But yeah, that's the experience, I think, of a lot of Russian people out there.
It's interesting as well, because I remember back in the 1980s, there was a group of kids, school kids, that came out of Armenia SSR, so part of the former Soviet Union, but they were from the Armenian Republic of the USSR. And I was involved in the Armenian community back in London, and there was a speech at the time by one of the local Armenians from London, and he was being critical of Margaret Thatcher. And the children started crying because they were afraid that because he had spoken against the prime minister, that somebody was going to phone the police, and that the room or the event was going to be raided by police. Because that's basically the impression that they had. If somebody spoke out against Gorbachev at the time was the president, if somebody had spoken out against the Soviet government, that there would have been a spy somewhere in the room, and they would have contacted these people. And what you're saying is, in some ways at least, there is still a similarity between how the current Russian government kind of manages certain arenas and how the Soviets did.
Yeah, maybe even not in the way they. I don't think they wanted to manage it in the same way as back then. I actually don't know what's in their mind, but from my perspective, it just felt like it was coming back to monarch ways, even when you cannot speak badly of a king, you know, or do anything that would touch any topics that are kind of against the beliefs of these several people who are in charge of the whole country. And I actually feel close to this story. Like, I still get scared sometimes of the things here that are actually pretty normal to people, like doing demonstrations. It's a culture shock, absolutely, that police doesn't harm people here. They actually help them, because I heard a story from Anya Demidova. She's a performance artist and theater director. And she did a performance here in Berlin last year during the Victory Day. I'm not gonna go into detail because it's gonna take a lot of time, but I can share it later. And it was a very political performance. It was connected to the war happening in Ukraine. And she told me that the police was actually helping her to keep her safe because there were other Russians, Putinists, who were becoming aggressive, and they were pretty drunk, and they helped her. And I was just looking at the pictures where policemen are around her, keeping her safe. Wow, what? How? And it's just so nice to walk around and see these people and not feel threatened at all. And that I coming here actually felt like I can speak whatever I want to speak about. Even not even in political sense, but just in general, I can just be myself, and I won't be judged as much. I won't be kind of threatened once again, and just a lot of freedom that I've never experienced before, and it's absolutely beautiful. But I also understand people who are still there, going through it, and I don't know. It's a lot. I mean, it can be an endless talk.
Yeah, sure. And yeah, I can sense obviously from your words how, I mean, you still are emotionally connected to the events back home. And I guess you're worried also about some of your friends and how they're doing and how they're coping in these situations.
Yeah.
Do you still have contact with them on a regular basis, or is that difficult?
No. Oh, I do have contact with them. It doesn't yet, and hopefully never comes to the point where I cannot contact my family or friends there. I do feel anxious about their safety, not only because of some government and political issues, but just in general, it's just a lot of mess going on there. And it's also, around people as well. So yeah, hopefully they can experience the kind of freedom I'm experiencing and the kind of fun I'm having here in the upcoming future. And some of my friends actually also want to go move to Europe, and I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah, that would be great for them and obviously for you as well. So hopefully that will occur. I really hope, and we've touched also on a couple of different issues that we would like to talk about in future episodes. I've really enjoyed listening to your stories and your take on art and the motivations behind which interested you in the first place in modern art as well. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts on feminism and other topics too. So thank you very much, Lulu, for coming to talk with me.
Thank you for having me here once again. It was really a pleasure. It feels like I said some things that were coming, and they were there. And it's really nice to speak about it and in a such safe and comfortable space and be heard.
You will always find this space welcoming to your thoughts and very much safe as well. So thank you again, and I look forward to the next one. Two and a mic.